So this your mine, huh?
Yes, this is my mine. My dad showed it to me about 5 years ago.
The claim wasn't just struggling. It was finished. Not barely surviving, not underperforming, completely written off. In the Klondike, that kind of reputation doesn't happen lightly. It means the ground has been worked, analyzed, and officially abandoned by experienced miners who know exactly what they're doing. 3 separate operations had already tried their luck there. Together, they poured nearly $8 million into the ground and barely recovered a fraction of that. In mining circles, that kind of failure sticks. It becomes a warning, the kind of claim that, when mentioned, makes seasoned miners exchange a silent look that says, "We've all been there. It doesn't work." But when Freddy Dodge and Juan Ibarra stepped onto that same dead ground, they didn't see failure. They saw a mistake, one that had been repeated 3 times. It wasn't about missing deeper gold veins or overlooking some hidden geological structure. It was something far more basic and far more fixable. Every previous operation had failed for one simple reason. Their wash plants couldn't capture the gold that was actually there. This claim didn't produce chunky, easy-to-catch nuggets. It was rich in fine gold, tiny particles, often called flour gold, that slip through inefficient systems like they don't even exist. Season after season, that gold had been washing straight through the plants and ending up in the tailings piles, unnoticed, uncollected, and completely misunderstood. The operators assumed the ground was empty. It wasn't. Freddy realized that in just 40 minutes. 40 minutes of studying abandoned equipment and leftover tailings was all it took for him to pinpoint exactly why 3 serious mining operations had failed. Not bad luck, not poor ground, just the wrong system. And once he saw it, he turned to Juan and made it clear. They had 72 hours to fix everything, or the Klondike season would shut them down. What happened next was nothing short of unbelievable. In just 3 days, they transformed a claim everyone had given up on and pulled out gold worth $300 million. This wasn't luck. This was precision, experience, and timing colliding at the perfect moment. If you're into real mining stories, hit like and subscribe, because what Freddy Dodge accomplished in 72 hours is something 3 full operations couldn't do in years. And the way he did it changes how you look at failure in this industry. This wasn't even their first major win. Freddy Dodge and Juan Ibarra had already proven what they were capable of. Before this, they had been part of a massive $450 million success, reviving a failing wash plant and redirecting operations toward a convergence zone that Juan had identified through geological mapping. That breakthrough didn't just make money, it changed how the entire Klondike mining community viewed them. Freddy had never been the loud, spotlight-seeking type. He operated more in the background, respected deeply by those in the industry, even if he wasn't always front and center publicly. But among serious miners, his reputation was rock solid. After that $450 million success, everything shifted. They started getting access to better opportunities. Conversations changed. Operators who once called others first were now reaching out to Freddy and Juan. Results like that speak louder than anything else. But more importantly, it changed how they chose their next projects. Before that success, like most independent miners, they had to think about budgets, accessibility, and manageable risk. They aimed for solid ground, something dependable that could turn a profit. Afterward, the strategy evolved. They weren't just looking for good ground anymore. They were looking for broken ground, places where others had failed. Because they knew something most didn't. Failure doesn't always mean there's no gold. Sometimes it just means nobody solved the right problem. Their strength wasn't just finding gold, it was fixing what others couldn't. That combination of Freddy's mechanical expertise and Juan's geological instincts became incredibly powerful when applied to the right situation. And that's exactly how the dead claim entered the picture. It came up during one of those casual, off-the-record conversations that happen all the time in the Klondike. Around trucks, over meals, at the end of long workdays. Juan was talking to a veteran miner who mentioned the claim almost dismissively. "Don't waste your time," the man said. 3 crews tried, nobody made it work. Ground is what it is. Most people would have left it there. Juan didn't. Over the years, he had learned something important. When everyone agrees about a claim, it doesn't always mean they're right. Sometimes it just means nobody asked the right questions. So, he asked Juan, "What did the tailings look like?" The veteran shrugged. "Same as always, gray, washed out." Juan didn't stop there. "What about the fine material?" he asked. "Any signs of mineralization in the tailings layers?" The man paused, and for the first time, he actually thought about it. Something. The tailings from the very first operation had a strange look to them. I can't explain it perfectly, but for material that's supposed to be washed out, it looked almost bright. Juan nodded, thanked him, and moved on. About an hour later, he found Freddy. "I want you to come check something out with me," he said. The next morning, they were on site. The place looked exactly like what you'd expect from a claim that had failed 3 times. Old equipment scattered across the ground, slowly breaking down under the elements. Massive tailings piles stretching across the site, dull gray and lifeless, like the land itself had already been judged and dismissed. Half-built structures, disconnected systems. Everything about the place said the same thing. This operation is over. Juan started walking the site, reading it the way only a geologist can. He studied the tailings layers, the exposed cuts, piecing together what had been done, and more importantly, what hadn't. Freddy didn't waste time wandering. He went straight to the wash plant, the heart of the entire operation. It was still there, too expensive to move, but not valuable enough to save. Freddy circled it slowly, studying the sluice setup from the outside. Then he opened it up, checking the internal components. He crouched underneath, examining the water flow system. 40 minutes. That's all it took. After that, he walked back over to Juan, who was still analyzing the ground, and gave him the answer that changed everything. "The problem isn't the ground," Freddy said calmly. "It's the sluice setup." He wasn't criticizing, he was diagnosing. The matting, the riffles, the water speed, all of it is designed for medium to coarse gold. It's a standard Klondike setup, works perfectly fine, on the right ground. Juan looked up. "But not here." Freddy shook his head. "This claim produces fine gold, flour gold, the kind that doesn't settle unless everything is dialed in perfectly. And right now, the system is doing the exact opposite of what it should." He pointed toward the tailings piles. Every run they did, every season, that fine gold went straight through the system and ended up right there. Juan followed his gaze. 3 full seasons of processed material, not waste, lost gold. They paid to dig it, run it, and then threw it away, Freddy added. Juan stood there for a moment, already doing the math in his head. The volume of those tailings piles, the number of yards processed, the concentration of fine gold that had been missed. It added up fast. "How long to fix it?" Juan asked. Freddy didn't hesitate. "If I can get the right parts, 72 hours, it can be done." Juan pulled out his phone and checked the calendar. The season window was closing fast. Time wasn't just limited. It was almost gone. This wasn't an ideal setup, not even close, but it was an opportunity, and they both knew it. "What do you need?" Juan asked. Freddy started listing components. Juan started making calls. The clock had officially started. Hour 1 of the 72-hour turnaround began with a supply run. The materials Freddy needed weren't rare, they were precise. Specialized sluice matting, adjusted riffle designs, and water flow modifications specifically built for fine gold recovery. Everything existed, just not within easy reach of a remote claim on a tight deadline. Juan leaned on every connection he had, and after their $450 million success, those connections mattered. Suppliers who normally would have given standard timelines suddenly moved faster. Orders that should have taken days were prioritized. What normally takes 5 days showed up in just 18 hours. While Juan handled logistics, Freddy got to work. He began tearing down the existing system piece by piece, moving with the efficiency of someone who's rebuilt more wash plants than most people have ever seen. Every part came off in a precise order. Nothing random, nothing rushed. Each component was inspected, kept if it could still be used, replaced if it couldn't. As the system came apart, the real problem became even clearer. The setup wasn't built wrong. It was built for the wrong kind of gold. The previous operators hadn't been careless. They had followed standard Klondike practices, the same setup that works on most claims in the region. But this ground wasn't most claims. It required a completely different approach, and no one before had identified that difference. Freddy had. In under an hour. Minutes. That's all it took. Because Freddy wasn't guessing. He was reading the system. Decades of hands-on experience had trained him to understand a wash plant the way most people read words on a page. Every component, every angle, every flow pattern told him exactly what was happening and what was going wrong. Hour 18. The materials finally arrived. Everything Juan had lined up came through. The calls, the connections, the urgency, it all paid off. Supplies that should have taken days showed up in less than one. Freddy didn't just start building, he checked everything. Not because he didn't trust the suppliers, but because experience had taught him that even the right parts sometimes need adjustments before they're ready for real work. Everything passed. So, he got to work. What followed wasn't just a rebuild, it was precision engineering in real time. Juan had seen a lot of skilled people over the years, but even he later admitted this was different. Freddy wasn't following a template. He was designing a system specifically for this ground. Every piece of sluice matting, every riffle, every angle, placed exactly where it needed to be to capture fine gold, the kind most systems lose. Water flow wasn't guessed, it was shaped, adjusted, controlled, built around the behavior of microscopic gold particles that most operators never even consider properly. Juan worked beside him the entire time, handling logistics, moving heavy parts, solving the small but constant problems that come with fieldwork, so Freddy could stay locked in on the technical side without breaking focus. They didn't stop, not even overnight. In the Klondike summer, daylight barely disappears anyway. But even if it did, it wouldn't have mattered. Time was too tight. Hour 43. The rebuild was complete. Now came the test. Freddy ran water through the system first. No material, just flow. This was his standard process. Watch the water, study how it moves, catch anything that doesn't match the design. He made 4 small adjustments, tiny changes, but critical ones. Each one brought the system closer to perfect fine gold recovery conditions. Hour 51, first test run. Juan had gathered material from the old tailings, the same tailings 3 operations had already processed and abandoned. In other words, material everyone believed was worthless. They ran it. Then came the cleanup. This was the moment of truth. Freddy leaned over the pan, and there it was. Fine gold, clear, visible, recoverable. Gold that had been missed, not once, not twice, but for 3 full seasons. Juan looked at it quietly. It works. Freddy didn't celebrate. He was already thinking ahead. We've got 21 hours left, he said. Let's use them. They kept running material, not at full production, but enough to gather serious data. Enough to understand what this system could really do. Hour 72. The numbers were in. Juan sat down with everything. The tailings volume, the recovery rates, the geology of the claim, and ran the calculations. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he showed Freddy. Freddy stared at the numbers for a long moment. That's just from the tailings? He asked. Juan nodded. That's just the tailings, the untouched ground. He pointed toward the rest of the claim. That's even bigger, and this estimate, it's conservative. Freddy leaned back. We need to come back here. Immediately, Juan replied. 2 weeks later, they did. But this time, it wasn't a test. It was a full-scale operation. The 72-hour rebuild had proven everything they needed to know. Now it was time to collect. Freddy built the full system with the same philosophy. Nothing generic, nothing standard. Every part tailored specifically for fine gold recovery. They started with the tailings, 3 seasons of discarded material. Ground the entire mining community had written off as completely barren. And it produced gold. At recovery rates that would have sounded impossible if they hadn't already seen the proof. Then they moved to the untouched ground, the areas previous crews never reached, or couldn't process properly. This is where Juan's geological mapping came into play, identifying exactly where ancient water flows had concentrated fine gold deposits over time, gold that had been sitting there, untouched, through years of failed attempts, waiting for the right system. Over 8 weeks, the numbers kept climbing. Tailings plus fresh ground, combined total, 147,000 ounces of gold. At market prices, roughly $300 million from a claim everyone had given up on. Later, they presented the results at a regional mining gathering, the same kind of setting where this story had first started. The veteran who had told Juan, "Don't bother," was there. He studied the numbers for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "The tailings," he said slowly. "It was all in the tailings." Juan nodded. "And in the ground, they never reached. The system just couldn't hold the fine gold." The room went quiet. The veteran paused. "I've been doing this for 30 years, he said. "Walked past that claim 100 times. He looked back at the numbers. 40 minutes, he added, almost to himself. Juan nodded again. "That's all it took." Across the room, Freddy was talking casually with other operators, calm, relaxed, like someone who didn't need to prove anything anymore. The veteran watched him. 40 minutes. But this time, there was no frustration in his voice, only respect. Conclusion. This isn't really a story about gold. It's a story about understanding the difference between failure and misdiagnosis. 3 operations worked that ground. They had the budget, the equipment, the effort, but they got one thing wrong. They assumed the ground had no gold, because that's the obvious conclusion when nothing pays out. But it wasn't the ground, it was the system. Freddy saw that in less than an hour, not because he was lucky, but because he had the experience to read what the equipment and tailings were actually saying. The gold had always been there. The setup just couldn't catch it. 72 hours to fix the mistake. 8 weeks to recover what had been lost. $300 million from a claim everyone had already buried. That's what real expertise looks like. Not just knowing the standard method, but knowing when the standard method is wrong. Freddy asked that question in 40 minutes. Juan understood what it meant, and together, they turned a dead claim into one of the most unbelievable recoveries the Klondike has ever seen. And more importantly, they had the skill set to actually act on it. The Klondike has always rewarded expertise. That hasn't changed. What has changed is understanding that not every problem requires the same kind of expertise. And the real challenge is knowing exactly which one applies. That's what Freddy and Juan figured out. And a claim that everyone had already written off gave up $300 million just to prove them right. If you found this story as incredible as it sounds, hit subscribe, because when 2 operators pull that kind of value out of ground 3 other crews walked away from, it redefines what dead ground really means in the Klondike. And one thing is certain now. Wherever Freddy and Juan go next, the entire mining world will be watching.